My first experience with Practical Farmers of Iowa was when we first moved to Cedar Falls and got involved with a project with Dan Specht and Mike Nadvig, who were interested in incorporating native prairie plants into Mike's rotationally grazed pasture. And so that was the first chance that I got to try to figure out how could prairies and farming kind of coexist one way or another in some kind of production scheme. So just in the last year, I've joined the Tallgrass Prairie Center as the director. This is a part of the University of Northern Iowa, and our mission is to restore native prairie for the benefit of society and the environment. And we use education and a lot of applied research and technology transfer to accomplish that. So our origins at the Tallgrass Prairie Center are in helping roadside managers across the state to use integrated techniques to manage roadsides. This was part of legislation that was passed in 1988 by the state legislature, and it established an integrated roadside vegetation management program at University of Northern Iowa. And this is sort of the roots of the Tallgrass Prairie Center. So for the last 25 years, we've been involved in helping roadside managers, supporting them in their efforts to manage roadsides in a more integrated way. And one of the key tools, in addition to herbicide use and other things, is to use diverse native plantings, because the diverse prairie plantings are well adapted to Iowa's ecological conditions. They're great at dealing with volumes of water in the roadside ditches, and those roots are really good for erosion control. And the diversity of the planting also assists in weed control. Prior to the establishment of this legislation, counties were routinely blanket spraying their roadsides with 2,4-D every year to control thistles in their brome. And the thistles will just keep coming back, and they just keep spraying them. With the advent of using multiple species in mixtures, we've largely reduced that problem with thistles in those roadsides, and it doesn't cost as much to spray every year as it does to plant a good diverse prairie and keep it healthy with proper management. So our focus has been doing that applied research and also the necessary networking, support, conferences, technical publications, anything we can think of to help the county roadside manager working within that county secondary roads office, or perhaps their conservation board office, to achieve success. And this guy's obviously very happy with his roadside stand. So that's the sort of the roots of the Tallgrass Prairie Center. We have gotten funding from Living Roadway Trust Fund to do a lot of this applied research, and I'll tell you about some of those things and how they might apply to agricultural situations. So one of the first things that we were really confronted by was the availability of high quality native seed. And the fact is that commercial seed producers weren't producing a lot of wildflower seed back in the day. They had access to grass seed mainly from Kansas and Nebraska. But the Iowa source wildflower seed wasn't there, and so we started a whole program to collect seeds from native remnants across the state that really capture the genetic diversity and the identity of Iowa. And then we plant them out in the greenhouse, in our greenhouse, and make plugs. And then we basically farm the seed. So we use techniques that are used in organic veg crop production and produce our crop of, in this case, swamp milkweed. So these seeds aren't sold on the open market. We're not in competition with the commercial native seed industry. Instead, this is the foundation genetics for their production. So if you go to Ion Exchange to buy your prairie seed, or if you go to Allen Dan or any number of wonderful companies that are out there, likely they've gotten their seed from us. So you're buying seed that is Iowa. It's a source identified. We actually use a third-party certification system called the Yellow Tag that certifies that the seed that you're buying came from Iowa prairie remnants and is from here. It's not from Nebraska. It's not from South Africa. It's not from anywhere else. It's our seed. And then we harvest it with the cutest little combine you've ever seen. So we're also involved in research and applications. We do a lot of restoration for different groups, such as the University of Northern Iowa campus, converting some of the unused turf areas that cost lots of money to mow, and then we convert that to prairie, and that pays for itself within 3 years. This is Dave Williams. He's our prairie guy. We've done a lot of research together over the years, working on things like the kinds of seed mixes to use, what species work best in what environments, how to calibrate that drill and make sure you're, as Todd said, you're getting just the right depth and you're just getting just the right seeding rate for your purposes. Pre and post plant management, prescribed fire and other means of controlling woody invasives. We produce technical manuals, we do workshops for the NRCS and various others who are interested in the nuts and bolts and all the details and a lot of the great questions you guys were asking. These are the sorts of things that we do research on. And that's all been mainly for this population of roadside managers who are growing these and need advice and need assistance. Just some of our publications. We've got seedling guides. This tech manual for roadside managers is very detailed information about planting prairies using different methods. Hydro-seeding is another method that's often used. And then we have a series of YouTube videos, which are just very, very fun. So they're riveting. So when Iowa State University came up with this wonderful idea of putting prairie strips on the contour and using that for erosion control and also for increase in biodiversity conservation, I had mixed feelings, I have to admit. I'm not much of a inter-school rivalry kind of a person, but I have to say, it's like, wait a second, that's our game. University of Northern Iowa isn't known for much, but what we are known for is for our prairie restoration and research. So I had to kind of overcome a little bit of that feeling, but we realized that we had something here we could really help to help this idea take off by adding this expertise that we developed through the roadside programs, and make sure that was available, that same expertise and that same information and technology transfer was available in this larger market for agriculture. So some of the attributes, I'm sure some of you have already seen this, some of the attributes of putting 10% of a field into a contour prairie strip: 32% less water runoff, 95% less soil export, 89% less phosphorus loss, 82% less nitrogen export from these fields that were established at Neil Smith National Wildlife Refuge, and twice the birds and wildlife. So a lot to be said for this approach. Really a fantastic innovation that is apparently there's quite a lot of interest in. So we know in this room, we know that a lot of the issues that we face are interrelated. The climate change, the soil loss and loss of soil organic matter, the mining essentially of that organic matter, the increased flooding, the increase in nitrogen levels in our drinking water and in rivers, the soil erosion, and now the issues with pollinators and with decline in monarchs. These are all interrelated to the loss of perennial and diverse perennial vegetation on the landscape. And they're all really coming together in an interesting way right now. We feel like Prairie is the way to address all of these in an integrated approach. Somehow we have to make money on it too. That's not my department, fortunately. We really advocate for high levels of diversity, and this is what we're really shooting for in these roadsides. And again, a lot of it is to combat the weed problem, so that we're not dealing with the cool season grasses. We're not dealing with the weedy species that become an issue. So our seed mixes are always at least 35 species or more. 40 seeds per square foot seems to be a good magic number unless you're dealing with highly erosive situations and then you boost the seeding density. We're often using a nurse crop or we're hydro seeding where there's steep slopes because you don't want that expensive prairie seed just running down to the bottom of the ditch or of the lower spots. The soils at that site, the time of year of planting, and the method of planting, whether it's drilled or hydroseeded or broadcast, all affects the seed mix. So this is very complex and it's all very dependent on individual situations. And so every seed mix that we design is very carefully custom designed for all of these contingencies. It's kind of like what Gloria Steinem said about Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire. Ginger Rogers did everything Fred Astaire did, but she did it backwards and in high heels. So prairie restoration compared to corn production, that's mine. I like to tease the corn agronomists. But I minored in agronomy, so I feel I can get away with that. We use half of the seeds per square foot are forage seeds, and they're the right forage seeds for that spot. If you use some of the canned mixes that are out there, they'll have a lot of forage seeds in it, but sometimes they're very tiny seeds that aren't going to come up very well, and they may not be adapted to that site. And so when you really look closely at it, you have to look at what species are in your seed mix that will actually survive there and thrive, and you'll get to enjoy them. No sense planting them if you're never going to see them. We like to use a mixture of native warm season, native cool season, and sedges in our mixtures. That is what is going to get all of those different niches filled so that the weeds don't come in as badly. And it is a custom seed mix. And then post-planting management is also very important. We advocate for pretty frequent mowing in the first year. It keeps the weed plants down. As the season progresses, you raise the cutter bar, and the seedlings, the small prairie plants that are down there, are well below that cutter bar, but you're cutting off those annual weeds that are going to come up in any environment. Yes? I think either would work. But it has to be timely. It should be below knee height when you cut it. Otherwise, if you cut it too high, if you wait, things happen and you don't get to it, and all of a sudden those weeds are too high. When you do cut it, you've just set a load of hay down on these tiny little prairie seedlings, and then they can get smothered, and that's not good either. And you might have to rake it off. And basically, once it gets starting to be shady down there, those little seedlings will start to get long and spindly, and then they're very easily killed. Why diversity? And this is just a little attempt to pitch the diversity, because it is expensive. Adding wildflower seeds is expensive, and you wonder, is this really worth it in a farm setting? So my analogy or my question to you is, why do we have so many football players on the team when there's only 11 on the field at one time? Right? Why is that? I'm asking you.
Football's a crazy sport.
A lot bigger than others.
Well, yeah, there's a twofold difference in weight. I checked. They give their weight. There's a 160-pound guy and there's a 320-pound guy in the sport.
We're in Ames. What do we know about football?
Well, I certainly don't. But you got specialties, right? You got your offense and your defense. They're not playing the same, not the same guys. You've got your specialty players, your kickers, your all these things. And then you've got your freshmen, sophomores, juniors. You've got to have people to replace the guys who get kicked off the team for misbehaving. And so, this is all, they're expensive to maintain. Then you got your coaches and your trainers and, this, that, and the other. So in a prairie, there's a lot of different roles to play. And there's a lot of different times that those plants are active. So you have plants like this beautiful Baptisia that are blooming in May. And then you have other plants that are blooming at different times of the year. So you have plants that are blooming clear into late September, for instance. So there are, from the perspective of butterflies and the other plants, the other insects, they need that diversity, right? They got to have something to eat throughout that season. in terms of the roots that are growing in the ground, that are feeding the soil fauna and bacteria. You have to have activity going on throughout the entire growing season. So we have plants that are active in a high diversity prairie from April until October, right? And so through that entire time, there's plants that are active and doing things. And the more diversity that you put into your seed mixes and that you get into your stands, the more of the season, more solar energy it's capturing, the more it's benefiting a lot of different things. So this is just a little study that is testing out that idea a bit. We were able to work with the Iowa Power Fund for a number of years to look at possible uses of prairie for biofuel, either for burning in the power plant at Cedar Falls Utilities or some other purposes. And we were very influenced by some papers that were coming out of Minnesota saying that over time, if you really look at it, mixtures are going to yield, in terms of biomass, they're going to yield more than monocultures. And we really wanted to test that out. And so we established an experiment beginning in 2007. It was flooded out in 2008. We had to start over, replant the whole $30,000 worth of seed. 2009. The 4 treatments were switchgrass only, a warm season grass mix of 5 species, a 16 species mix that we sometimes call the biomass mix, which included both grasses and wildflowers, and then finally the 32 species mix, which we call the prairie mix. And we wanted to see how they would yield, what would happen with weed issues, and also what would happen with soil carbon and with wildlife populations. We worked with the Soil Tilth Lab here in Ames on the soil carbon, and then we did the other studies of the biomass and so forth. We also did a test burn at utilities with some of this material. So this is the experiment. It was replicated. We had 3 soil types, so the 4 treatments were replicated on each of the 3 soil types: a silt, a sandy loam, a loam, and a clay loam. It's a floodplain in Blackhawk County, the only place that would give us any land to plain site. Couple of floods, and a drought, 2012. So we saw all of that too. So why use it? I think I already said this. The wildlife, the plant roots are active. I haven't mentioned beauty, but sometimes that's important. And it does replace this lost monarch habitat that's been lost. It was monarchs were breeding in cornfields on common milkweed, and that's largely gone in many areas of Iowa. It turned out it was a very important source of the migratory monarch population. So this is a way to add to their populations. So just a little on the butterfly surveys. Of course, you see a lot more butterflies where there's flowers, and you see more birds as well where there's the diversity. That's just a shot of our roots team. We produced these root systems to help illustrate to people just what's going on underground. That's a lead plant. It fixes nitrogen. It used to be called prairie shoestring, I guess. When they plowed it up, it snapped like shoestrings. So just a little bit, and just a couple minutes, we are starting a new project. We've got some funding from the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Center, the NRCS, Leopold Center for Sustainable Agriculture, and New York Community Trust, along with the Monarch Joint Venture. Working to help be a resource for folks like you, for technical service providers, for landowners who want to plant prairie on their land, with some demonstration sites and some workshops, helping with the custom seed mixes. And we want to develop kind of a working group or learning community to help people communicate with one another about what's working for them and what they're trying. And we have Mr. Luz here, who's one of our cooperators. He's going to be using a portion of one of his fields for these prairie strips, and also Wayne Bierman from Hertz Farm Management. They're checking out our combine, which they found extremely amusing. This is some of Randy's land in Tama, Benton County area. I guess it's Benton County, right? And beautiful soils, long slopes, a real challenge, especially for seed corn production. And so we'll be putting some prairie strips in on, and maybe not exactly in this spot, but it all has to work into the width of their equipment and so forth, and work into their whole cropping system. And so we're really excited. Started. We'll be comparing different types of seed mixes on that site and another site at Nashua, so that you can walk and you can look and see the difference for yourself, what it means to use a canned mix versus more of a custom mix, what it means to if you mow versus if you don't mow, what are you going to get? Because seeing is believing. You really have to see these differences for yourself. And we'll also be exploring the adaptations that we'll need to make with each and every landowner to make sure that it fits into their operation. Questions like the tile lines, for example, are very important. And can we find species of wildflowers, especially milkweeds, that don't become weed problems in their cropping systems? And, so we're really excited to get started with that work. The workshops over a variety of different, and these are our partners, including PFI and Miller Creek Watershed Project.